Shalom, Rabbi Papi, and shalom. Um,
Good
there you
morning,
go,
everyone.
Carol.
Wait a minute here. Okay. Now I should be able to hear everybody.
Oh yeah, we hear you fine.
Yeah, no, I know you can hear me. I just didn't.
Sometimes I can't hear you. I have a hearing problem. Lots of problems. Okay, that's just one of many.
There was a cartoon once about somebody talking to one of his coworkers and saying, we seem to have a communication problem. You insist on talking to me. So, I used to joke with my mother. She had a hearing problem, but she would never use her hearing aids. So,
Well, the problem is that the hearing aids are essentially work electronically, and sometimes when you want to use an electronic hearing aid, listening to something that's on an iPhone or an Apple device, something gets crossed in a wire somewhere. Of course, there
yeah,
are no wires, but in the Bluetooth or whatever it is.
yeah.
And the
I
result
realize.
is you're better off taking the hearing aids out and leaving them in.
I know
Okay?
that's.
So that's the problem.
I don't think there's anyone with hearing aids who hasn't made that same comment. Excuse me, I'll be right back. I just have to get a cough drop.
Well, at least she makes you feel better. You're not alone. There's Rabbi Zucker. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
How's your Tu B'Shvat Seder?
It was wonderful.
Terrific, terrific.
We
I
had
tell you,
20
when you
people.
wrote Strasbourg,
Nice.
that just floats with so many memories for me that I mean, I was Strasbourg. My first trip there was when I was 9 years old in 1947. That was 2 years before Noam Chomsky becomes my counselor. And by the way, in those days they didn't pronounce his name Chomsky. His father was Abe Chomsky, a very
Right.
important American Hebrew writer who basically wrote for Hadar all the time, you know. And the camp I was going to was my side, the Hebrew speaking camp. So, and I mean, for not make believe Hebrew speaking, this one was for real. And so it wasn't a little strange for Abe Klumsky to send his son Noam to my side to become a counselor, you know. And in those days, Rabbi Zucker, he was not what he became later. Okay.
Sure.
You
Sure.
know? In fact, I never even realized until I started reading linguistics and stuff. Oh, that was Noam, you know. In other words, that was one of these flashbacks that came later, you know. It's like the airplane when Mossad. You ever hear the story, Rabbi Popti, about when Mossad people rented a plane in order to scatter stuff on Ramah in the Poconos? Or you never heard the story? We
No.
we scattered stuff saying, stop talking about speaking Hebrew, speak it. You know, the way like people used to walk around in Israel and telling Ivri, Daber Ivrit. Once they made the mistake of accosting Bialik with that, who was talking Yiddish to somebody, and the guy Bialik turns towards them and says, and me, I tell you, when they heard it was Bialik, they
Yeah,
that was
I
one
was
of our
really,
stunts.
yeah. I have to say I was pretty much in shock the first time I visited Ramon, Canada. And I heard a member of the staff get up in front of the camp and speak English. I had never ever seen that in a Camp Ramon. Well, certainly not in Camp Ramon, the Poconos.
There was a
And what
Mossad in
killed me.
Canada too, but it wasn't affiliated with the Mossad in America. It was just the same name. But
Hmm.
they did speak Hebrew there. I had a girlfriend there. I mean, a girlfriend there. A girl I knew, you know. Either way, the bottom line was I made a trip there in order to see her. And the problem is you get lost and nobody speaks anything but Canadian French. You know, I have a little bit of French, but not enough to get by in the way they talk. You know. So, but yeah, no, it's doable. You know, my proudest accomplishment in 7 years of Mossad was once I got that shirt with an iron on it, which meant that you had gotten through the entire summer without speaking 4 and 5 English sentences in a day. in a single day the entire summer. That's how you got it. Okay. So at Chatayani Maskir Ayom, I managed to get it once in 7 years.
No, that's still pretty good.
Yeah.
Think of all the people who never got it.
Yeah, that's right. Most people don't have it.
Yeah, it's kind of always kind of shocked me that when I was in rabbinical school and we were, did our year at Neve Shechter, for some of us doing 2 years, um, in the building, obviously the tabachiot, the cooks, and the office staff, they were all Israelis. And I was kind of shocked that I had colleagues that didn't speak to them in Hebrew. It's like, wait a minute, we're in Israel. We're in Israel to learn Hebrew, and they're Israelis. Speak to them in Hebrew.
So what was the reaction when you said that? This is what, the 90s? When did this happen?
80s.
Late 80s?
No, middle 80s.
Middle 80s. Because, let me tell you something. When you send a kid to yeshiva in Israel today, they don't come back with fluent Hebrew. They did
Oh,
when my
no.
kids went. They did that, though. In other words, when I said my kids went to Israel in the 80s, and they came back with fluent Hebrew. I mean, not that they had a problem with it before. They both went to the yeshiva, Flatbush Yeshiva Elementary and high school. But the bottom line is,
Well, that's a good background.
yes, it is. But you still couldn't get around in Israel without basically getting a pretty decent. In other words, nobody was going to speak to you in English in the yeshiva. Okay, that's where I'm going. Of course, the taxi driver might try out their English on you, but that's not the point. The point is that you had to get by on Hebrew during the entire year in Israel. And then now my grandchildren go there, and I asked them in the whole year you were there, did you ever have to speak Hebrew? Yeah, once, because I was invited to somebody's house for Shabbos, and that person didn't speak English. Beautiful, right?
Yeah, that's just
My Hebrew improved my second year. After I'd come back to the United States, I went right back to Israel. And after I finished guiding in English for the summer at the field school, I told everybody, okay, don't speak to me in English anymore. Or I would answer back in pidgin Hebrew, and they would get the picture, and I would ask them to just speak a little bit slower. And after 2.5 months, I finally dreamed one night in Hebrew, and then the next week I was perfect.
Yeah. I did Mishmar Ezrachi in Israel, not because I thought I was protecting Israel. Believe me, if me with the M1 was really going to stop a terrorist, then Israel was Avsoris. But I wanted to walk around the neighborhood and speak Hebrew for 2 hours, at least once a month. And I had people who are very,
You don't
very
get. You know what I'm
accommodating.
going to do? I'm going to tell Rabbi Zucker the joke about the chasfan, the original Hebrew word for archaeologists. Are you aware of that, Rabbi Zucker? Back in Eliezer ben Yehuda's time, the word for an archaeologist was not archaeologist like it is today. It was chasfan. Eliezer ben Yehuda wanted to find a good, serious. Okay. That word went very well for quite some time, but it disappeared in the late 50s when Yugo Yadin was having Americans coming on digs to help him out in the summertime. So, the word chasfan was used, but then what happens is a reporter from Ma'ariv goes and proceeds to interview a very fetching looking American girl who's helping out with the dig. And he asks her, she had enough people to ask for wrote Saliyot, and she answers that he wrote Saliyot chasfanit. That was the end of that word for all time. Ma'ariv put it in the headline, I was in Israel at the time. This is 1958. It was the biggest joke for the whole summer, And at that point, we stopped using the word chashvan. And there were a lot of words that were like classics, but didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, there was apparently a Hebrew word for sweater.
Sweater, Timbriya is what we learned.
Yeah,
You have it by Masad Dictionary, Rabbi Pop.
Yes.
No, don't forget your Sach Rachok.
Right. Or the one that I loved, being an audiophile, was Rasham Kol.
We had
now it's tape.
microphone. And Pasco was a subtitle, I think. Is that right?
What?
Pasco is a subtitle, or Pasco is the it's something to do with something that goes under the film.
I don't know. That one I
A
haven't.
Samach with a hyphen and Metek, and then you have Ko, Pasco. Okay? I think that's a subtitle, but it might also be a Chiron or something like that. I really forgot already which one it was.
Or
But
it could have also been,
I think we should get started, Rabbi
yeah,
Pastor.
an
This is getting
Ashkenazi who didn't
embarrassing.
really know
We
Hebrew.
had a very good time, but it isn't fair
Yeah.
to the other people.
Yeah. So, of course, in this week's parasha, we begin the first collection of laws in, sorry, losing my kippah. We begin the first collection of laws in the Torah, what we know as the Sefer HaBrit, the Covenant Code. And one of the things that surprises, I wouldn't say shocks, but surprises many modern readers, and even earlier than modern readers, is the fact that the collection begins with laws for the slave. We come out of slavery, and now suddenly we've got laws for slavery. Of course, as we know, it's really talking about debt slavery as opposed to chattel slavery, which is what we often think about here in the United States, for example. And that is actually the connection between the Torah portion and the Haftarah, is that, well, there are many different laws. The Haftarah focuses on this first law of the slaves, or at least how it's understood later on. So that's the connection between the parasha and the Haftarah. And Sarna points this out as he begins to he kind of tackles this question of why do we have this description of slavery at the very beginning of the laws. Carol, would you like to read?
Sure. The list of Mishpatim enactments begins with 10 laws regulating the institution of slavery. None of the other law collections from the ancient Near East opens with this topic. Hammurabi's, for example, deals with slavery last. The priority given to this subject doubtless has a historical explanation. Having recently experienced liberation from bondage, Israel is enjoined to be especially sensitive to the condition of the slave. The association of the Exodus with the regulation of slavery already appeared in the opening words of the Decalogue, where God is identified as the one who freed Israel from the thraldom of Egypt. The Decalogue then mandates the right of the slave to enjoy the weekly Sabbath rest. The same correlation of the themes of Exodus and slavery is present in the laws of Deuteronomy and the narrative of Jeremiah.
Which is, of course, our Haftarah. So, kind of got to pay attention to that. There is a little bit more of a discussion in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, and dealing with this struggle between, how do we have laws of slavery after coming out of Egypt? But let's go on to the Haftarah because it's a short, kind of self-contained but beautiful piece. Do you want to go on, Carol?
The word that came to Yirmiyahu from God after King Tzidkiyahu had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to proclaim a release among them, that everyone should set free their Hebrew slaves, both male and female, and that no one should keep their fellow Judean enslaved. Everyone, officials and people who had entered into the covenant, agreed to set their male and female slaves free and not keep them enslaved any longer. They complied and let them go. But afterward, they turned about and brought back the men and women they had set free and forced them into slavery again.
Okay, so let's kind of break down the different parts of what's going on here. King Zedekiah makes a brit, a covenant, brit et kol ha'am, with all the people. And part of this brit is they should release all of their slaves. So again, going back to Shemot and the Aseret HaDibrot for that matter, part of the Brit is freeing slaves. There's a connection between slavery and the brit between, well, first God and the people, but here between Tzidkiyahu and the people. And the historical background is the Babylonians had attacked Jerusalem. They really did a number on a lot of the surrounding towns. But then the Egyptian army um, kind of came out to meet them, and the Babylonians had to go back and deal with the Egyptians, and they left off the siege of Jerusalem. And it seemed there was a little bit of a respite. But beforehand, why, if there is a siege going on, why would it be so important to release the slaves?
May have needed manpower.
Right. You know, you needed more people to fight. But I guess as things seem to look a little bit better, yeah, we're going to take them back. And uh, even just from the narrative, it doesn't sound very nice. They make a breach with the king, release all the slaves, but now we're going to take them back. And the fact is, God is not particularly happy with this
And
as we
from
go
an
on.
extremist point of view, you should because if you think about it, this sounds a little unreal at first. Basically, what position are these people to take back the slaves? They're barely surviving themselves. I mean, I'm talking about from a straight military point of
Right.
view, enforce this. But you know something? In the Civil War, at the very end, believe it or not, Jefferson Davis and company were actually prepared to draft blacks to fight for the Confederacy. Lincoln had already started having them fight for the Union after the Emancipation Proclamation. So, in other words, it's nothing short of amazing what people are going to do in extremis. But then, of course, when they wake up, they often regret what they did, and they try to take it back, but it's too late.
So,
By the
so
way,
God,
if you'd like me to read it, I'll read it. I don't want to basically stick Carol with everything that has to be read. That's not fair.
I don't mind reading.
Okay. If you want to do it, Carol, go for it.
okay, so we're going to go on. And now, so as I said, God is not happy with this situation, and he delivers a message to Yirmiyahu to deliver to the people.
Then it was that the word of Hashem came to Yirmiyahu from Hashem. Thus said,
That should be, I should just know the.
okay, God, the God of Israel. I made a covenant with your ancestors when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, saying, in the 7th year, each of you must let go any fellow Hebrew who may be sold to you. When they have served you 6 years, you must set them free. But your ancestors would not obey me or give ear. Lately you turned about and did what is proper in my sight, and all of you proclaimed a release to your compatriots. And you made a covenant accordingly before me in the house that bears my name. But now you have turned back and have profaned my name. Each of you has brought back the men and women whom you had given their freedom and forced them to be your slaves again.
Okay, so first of all, God is angry. I mean, this is not the first time that God has been angry about this issue, it seems. That from the beginning, the Israelites did not necessarily pay attention to the law. And God had some hope. Here, they've made a brit and they've let the slaves go. But now, suddenly, they're taking them back again. And they're repeating the sins of their ancestors. A couple things here. First of all, the brit with Tzidkiyahu is now being compared to the brit with God. And the brit with God, of course, comes about because I am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So that brings a rather strong condemnation of their turning back on this brit that they made with Tzidkiyahu. this is clearly an important topic within the Brit, not just between the king and the people, but between the people and God. And it goes back to the very beginning. And it goes back to our creation as a people. And that really can't be emphasized enough. I know we've talked about this ad infinitum, about how the mitzvah that appears more often than any other in the Torah is some version of you shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In other words, the experience of Yitziat Mitzrayim is the formative experience for the Jewish people. That's the groundwork for the Brit. I mean, Sinai obviously is rather formative too, but it first of all comes out of the experience of release from freedom and oppression. And so that is just seen as a crucial and integral part of the Brit. Now, a couple interesting things here, that the Haftarah, of course, is connected with Parashat Mishpatim. The language of Jeremiah reflects the slavery laws of Deuteronomy. So here in Deuteronomy, and look at footnote 1, the bottom here, Miketz Sheva Shanim Ta'aseh Shmita. Every 7th year you shall practice a remission of debts. Ki macher lecha achicha ha'ivri, o ha'ivriya, if your fellow Israelite, man or woman, is sold to you. Vavadcha sheishanim, that person will work for you for 6 years. Uvashana shvi'it, in the 7th year, tishalchenu chofshi meimach, you're going to send him free. And that language is very much the language of our Haftarah. Almost verbatim. Miketz sheva shanim tishalachu ish et achiv ha'ivri, asher yimacher lecha v'avadcha sheishanim, v'shilach to chofshi meimach. So, it's just kind of interesting that the Deuteronomy seems to be the influence here on Yirmiyahu, and we know that Devarim is an influence on Yirmiyahu. Nonetheless, the rabbis connect it with Parashat Mishpatim. Again, probably as Sarna said, this is the first law that leads off, so that's why we have to bring it out. And then there are a lot of terms. Literarily, on one hand, it's a little repetitive, but it's also very, very powerful because they use the word chofshi, talking about freedom, tishalachu, you shall send them out.
Release might be better.
Release is better, yes. And of course, the emphasis on cutting a covenant. And also even the words lashuv or lahashiv, to return or to cause to return, they come again and again in the language of Yirmiyahu here. Like v'tashuvu atem hayom, but you shall turn back, v'tasu et yashar be'enai, and do what's right in my eyes. Likro dror, again, that expression, likro dror, which we'll come to in a moment, that appears many times here. So that the language, and then coming down a little bit further on the section, v'tashuvu v'tchalalu et shmi, you return and disgrace my name. Which normally, when we hear v'tashuvu, that's a positive thing, turning back to God. But here it's used in the negative. And again, v'tashivu ish et avdov ish et shivchato asher shilachtem chovshiim l'nafsham v'tichbeshu otam, but you captured them back.
That's a very interesting word. Kavash is better translated as subdue, because basically, what does it say at the beginning? Right? And this is about one of 3 instances in which what it means is to take somebody back as a slave. Then there's the part about Haman and Esther, Hagam lichbosha tamaka. Okay, so it's not the word for to conquer. To conquer means more like lachat is the closest to that in Tanakh. Okay, but To subdue it essentially basically means that the person, whoever it is who subdued, reports to you. You know,
And there's an element of humiliation.
of course there is.
So, that's a good point. They translate it here as
Or subjugate. That's another good word. Maybe better than the first one I suggested. Subjugate. That might be still better.
they totally miss. Now, again, proclaimed a release. That's an important phrase because we think of it mostly from Vayikra, the very famous line. Let me just get back here. So, and you will sanctify the 50th year. Ukratem dror ba'aretz lechol yoshveha, and you shall proclaim a release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. We, of course, always think of the line because it appears on the Liberty Bell, being from Pennsylvania. That's important. Ukratem dror ba'aretz lechol yoshveha. And we always translate it, proclaim liberty throughout the land. And that's not an incorrect translation, but it's not as accurate as this one. Release, because you're releasing people from their debts. Again, talking about debt slavery. It's also releasing the land to return to its original owners. Yovel hi tiyeh lachem. It will be a jubilee for you. V'shavtem ish elechu zato. Each person will return to his holding. V'ish el mishpachto tashuvu, and every person will return to his family. So it's a release from an ideal what would be normally the ideal condition, someone on his land, someone with his or her family. That's really a release. But and then, I mean, it appears a few other times in the Bible, but also
it basically has a connotation of free as a bird. And I think it's the word for sparrow, isn't it? In other words, now it's no longer a general word. It's a species. It's either a sparrow or a swallow. I forgot which one it is.
I think you're right. One moment.
But the basis is in Psalm 84. God see poor son drawer.
Right.
And you also have a phrase somewhere. See poor drawer. I'm sending the whole thing to you and Rabbi Zucker. You'll have 4 words in the search, all from this Haftarah.
Well,
you have a question. Are they counting the years from Yetziat Mitzrayim or from when they get into Eretz Canaan? What is the first year? Which one is it considered?
Well, I think on one hand, we have different ways of counting things because they also count things from the reigns of the kings.
Right. So, which one is this that he's referring to?
Well, I'm not getting this, Carol.
How do you count 50 years?
Count 50 years to Yovel, right? But what are they counting it from? From the time they left Egypt, or from the 40 years later when they?
Yovel doesn't come into existence until after we conquer Eretz Yisrael. It definitely does not have anything to do with Yetziat Mitzrayim. It starts after Sheva Shechoku, Sheva Shekavshu, and that's when the whole cycle of Yovel begins. In other words, at the time Yoshua ben Nun retires, chapter 28, 19, it's time for you to go. That's presumably when it begins. But it's clear that this is Kitavo Haaretz. It's not something that you just impose from day one. It's something that you only have to do when you're in possession of the land. In fact, according to the rabbis, the Yovel was stopped after the Assyrians conquered the majority of the land. Back in 742 BCE. 745 really, when Tiglath-Pileser came along and pretty much conquered, the most of the land area of classic Eretz Yisrael. So that was the end of Yovel once and for all.
Yeah. So it's really, that's the answer, really. As much as we like to think they would begin at a certain period, we also have the notion that these laws are given at Sinai or Barvot Moav, and they won't
a lot of them
until they enter into the land.
No, they're introduced with a statement saying you do this once you arrive, and once you set up shop.
I recall Milgram saying in class when we talked about this that according to his knowledge, there was no outside evidence that the Yovel ever was observed.
There is no outside evidence.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they never find any. You just haven't yet. You always have to take
just for what it's worth.
There is.
I'm not saying that it wasn't, but there was no outside corroborating evidence.
Right. But that
I think it
mean
is
there
kind
won't
of.
be some. It just
Yeah.
means that right now we don't have it.
Yeah, but I think it's also presented as kind of an ideal as much as a real thing. I mean, that doesn't mean it wasn't a real thing because they are trying to deal with the problems of debt slavery and problems of the poor in the land, so that these were, real issues. Also, the notion of release is, it's looking to an ideal situation because it's used in a very clearly messianic way later on in Isaiah. Ruach Adonai Elohim alai, the spirit of the Lord Adonai is upon me because Adonai has anointed me. He has sent me as a herald of joy to the humble, to bind up the wounded of heart, to proclaim release to the captives, likro lishvuim dror, v'la'asarim pekach koach, and liberation to the imprisoned. So the notion of drawer, I mean, and again, I think that whether or not it was literal or whether it was practiced, the notion was very powerful and very important. May have been an ideal, but I think there's also a certain sense that this ideal could perhaps indeed be realized. And again, we're tying all this in between the breach with God involves a recognition of our experience of slavery, and that has to create within us a particular sensitivity and concern.
Oh, I meant to say to Rabbi Zucker, no one has ever found any elephant bones in the Alps from Hannibal's triumphant march from Spain to Rome. So just don't say it isn't there. Just say we haven't found it yet.
I'm just reporting. Okay.
Well, they keep turning up stuff. We keep seeing reports of what they uncovered in Europe and even in Israel. You never know.
Every day. Yom yom yabi.
Yom yom.
Yeah, it's so.
Let's put it this way. If you're an archaeologist in Israel, you don't need to worry about being unemployed because in my day, they used to say, if we don't find anything new, we've got 800 years worth of research to do with what we already know.
Yep. So now, so God is, as I mentioned, rather angry, and the anger is pretty harsh, as we see. Do you want to go on, Carol?
Assuredly, thus said Hashem, you would not obey me and proclaim a release, each to your kin and neighbor. Lo, I proclaim your release, declares Hashem, to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine, and I will make you a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
You're not going to proclaim a release? I am. And I'm going to release all these horrible things, sword, pestilence, famine, horror to all the kingdoms, very harsh punishment. So this is, seen as a very, very serious sin. Go on.
I will make the parties who violated my covenant,
Pardon me.
who did not fulfill the terms of the covenant that they made before me, like the calf that they cut in two, so to pass between the halves. The officers of Judah and Jerusalem, the officials, the priests, and all the people of the land who pass between the halves of the calf shall be handed over to their enemies, to those who seek to kill them. Their carcasses shall become food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth.
As Rabbi Zucker mentioned, I don't know if it was last week or before, that, leaving someone unburied, to become carrion, that was like, one of the worst punishments and curses.
I will hand over King Tzidkiyahu of Judah and his officers to their enemies who seek to kill them, to the army of the king of Babylon that is withdrawn from you. I hereby give the command, declares Hashem, by which I will bring them back against this city. They shall attack it and capture it and burn it down. I will make the towns of Judah a desolation without inhabitant.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Is that even though Babylon had left off because they were fighting the Egyptians, they nonetheless came back and ended up destroying Jerusalem, as we know, and burning the temple. And of course, that leads to all the other prophecies about how the Israelites, the Judahites at this point, looked to looked to Egypt as a help, as an aid. And as we saw in an earlier Haftarah, it's like, yeah, you're like a reed. That's the kind of support you provide. Um, you bend and break and even end up stabbing us. So that was not going to happen. Now, coming back to this notion of, violated the covenant. Um, like the calf that they cut in two so as to pass between the halves. The officers of Judah and Jerusalem, the officials, the priests, and the people of the land who passed between the halves of the calf. What do we know about what's this passing between the halves of the calf?
That's with Abraham, right?
Exactly. Brit Bein Abtarim, the covenant of the pieces, which takes us back to Genesis 15. Here he answered,
Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young bird. He brought him all these and cut them in two, placing each half opposite the other. But he did not cut up the bird. There appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between those pieces. On that day, Hashem made a covenant with Avram.
Yeah, so very, very powerful scene. And, I cut out some sections. He has to beat away the birds. Is I'm awake or asleep? Is this a vision? Is this, but, the sense is God, often portrayed as fire, passes between the pieces. Now, this is also known from the ancient Near Eastern cultures. It's not just in the Bible. And there is an Aramaic text, the Sephire Stele, and you could probably, Rabbi Zucker could probably tell me a lot more about this than I know. And it was a treaty between Bir Agaya, king of, I don't know what KTK is, um, and Matail, king of Arpad. And the treaty is witnessed by various gods and establishes peace between the two kingdoms. It lays out curses that will befall Mati'il and Arpad if they violate the terms, including famine, plague, destruction of cities, and the end of Mati'il's rule. And in the concluding section here, they reaffirm the binding and sacred nature of the treaty. And here are the rights that go with it. Go ahead.
Nice work, Rabbi Poppy.
Pardon me?
Nice work. This is very nice what you're putting down there.
Yeah, not easy to find, but
It's very nice. It really is. That's a lot of work to pull something like this together.
Go ahead. Just as
this wax burned by fire, so may Arpad be burned, and their great daughter cities. May Hadad sow in them salt and weeds, and may it not be mentioned again.
Yeah, remember, pouring salt is a way of destroying the land, so it can't ever be useful again.
Okay, this GNB.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is.
Matil, it is his person. Just as this wax is burned by fire, so may Matil be burned by fire. Just as this bow and these arrows are broken, so may Inerta and Hadad break the bow of Matil and the bow of his nobles.
Yeah, so again, if you don't follow the terms of this, all these terrible things are going to happen. You'll be burned by fire, your land is going to be destroyed, your armies are going to be destroyed. Go ahead.
And just as the man of wax is blinded, so may Matil be blinded. Just as this calf is cut in two, so may Matil be cut in two. And may his nobles be cut in two. And just as a harlot is stripped naked, so
May the wives.
May the wives of Matil be stripped naked. Oh, God, it's horrible stuff.
Yeah.
And the wives of his offspring and the wives of his nobles. And just as this wax woman is taken and one strikes her on the face, so may the wives of Matil be taken.
Yeah, don't worry about the rest. I don't have to spend a lot of time on that. It's just to show that also in the ancient world, this notion of the covenant of pieces, that, it's not just invented by the Bible, but in fact, this was apparently one of the forms of talking about the curses. If you follow the rules, great. If not, all these terrible things are going to happen to you, which, of course, at the end of the great collection of laws in Vayikra, which is most of the book, you have the blessings and the curses.
Same thing
So,
in Devarim.
yeah, against, and, these were very common. Now, now we take a look at a Jewish source. Okay, it's nice to find out about, the Near Eastern background, but let's take a look and see, how our rabbis already picked up on this section in Yirmiyahu and the power, the importance of this rule of how we treat slaves. And this is from the Yerushalmi. Va'atia kahid amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, and it follows what Rabbi Shmuel ben Rav Yitzchak said. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe, and God spoke to Moses via Aharon, and he also spoke to Aaron. Vaytzavim el bnei Yisrael, and commanded them to the children of Israel. This is a verse. I've been reading it for years, and it always kind of bothered me. And now I kind of really understand why. Because what does it mean? God speaks to them and commands them about Israel. Well, Mahut Tzivautam, what did he command them? And that's exactly what the rabbis ask. Almat Sivam. We've just read this a couple weeks ago.
You do realize the pshat simply means charged.
Right.
Okay. I just want to be sure, because before you go into the drash, you have to get the pshat straight. Then you have to go for it.
Yeah, so the rabbis, are really, they're just picking up this. And so what did he command them regarding? Al parashat shiluach avadim, regarding the sending out of the slaves. Va'atya kihi de amar Rabbi Ila, and this parallels what Rabbi Ila said, Lo ne'enshu Yisrael, Israel was only punished, ela al parashat shiluach avadim, for the matter of the sending out the slaves. Hadahu dichtiv, as it is written, and of course this is the quote from our Haftarah. Oops, sorry. Miketz sheva shanim tishlechu ish et achiv ha'ivri, etc. So already our rabbis picked up very clearly the connection between Brit and the relationship with God, connected it to the Shiluach Avadim, which of course Yirmiyahu is already doing. And the rabbis pick up on that, and they take this unusual verse and say, aha, this is what it's talking about. The rabbis were just so wonderful at finding connections between different parts of the Tanakh. And let's just at least finish off the Haftarah, because it ends on a very positive note.
That's
Again,
it.
this is a very interesting. It's moved, as we've read before, that you can jump around within a prophetic reading, not between books necessarily, although they do that too. But as long as it's the Treyasar, the 12 prophets. But here, this comes from a little bit earlier on in Yirmiyahu, where after he's talking about all the horrible things that are going to happen, nonetheless, go ahead, thus said God.
As surely as I have established my covenant with day and night, the laws of heaven and earth, so I will never reject the offspring of Jacob and my servant David. You never know. I will never fail to take from his offspring rulers for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Indeed, I will restore their fortunes and take them back in love.
So, after all the horrible prophecies, there's still words of comfort. So we know that that's The rabbi said that half of Yirmiyahu is tochecha, is rebuke, and the other half is nechama, it's comfort.
Fishbane points out that you have three referred to in the Haftarah. The first one being the one that they did in Sidkiyahu's time, the second being the one from Sinai, and the third is the one that Hashem promises for the future, creation, revelation, and redemption time.
Right. Yeah, it's a beautiful
because otherwise it seems strange. Like I looked ahead to see if they could have found something in the next few chapters that could have qualified as Nechama enough to finish off a Haftarah. Answer: there isn't anything. They had to go backwards. Okay, I'm sure if they could have pulled it off going front, they would have, but they couldn't. Anyway, what they did, it comes out very well, especially the way Fishbane explains it.
Yeah. I did want to read a selection here. Again, coming back to this notion of slavery. Again, it's hard. I mean, certainly for those of us who live in the times we live in, but even beforehand, the notion of slavery, especially when we were rescued from slavery, yes, there's a difference between debt slavery and chattel slavery, but nonetheless, it kind of rubs us the wrong way. And it seems that it also rubbed the biblical writers the wrong way as well. I mean, not only do we have Yirmiyahu and God giving Yirmiyahu such a harsh punishment for not following this particular law, but we can see, at least according to one perspective, that as we move through the Tanakh, there are different ways to kind of humanize this. And I think that's true in general in Judaism. There are a lot of things in the Bible that really are produced, from those times with the perspectives of those times. And as Judaism developed, and as we began to look at our values and reevaluate our tradition in terms of our values, the values that are part of the tradition, suddenly, we may re-examine some of the things we've done. And I think, we have this process within the Bible. And here's what Marvin Sweeney in piece for the Bible for the Torah.com. This is what he writes. Anybody else want to go on?
Oh,
somebody. You can do so, but I just don't have much of a voice. So
yeah, the covenant code in Exodus 21 to 23 is largely devoted to social justice and sanctity in ancient Israel. The code begins by trying to soften the institution of debt slavery, an institution that disturbed the prophet Amos, who prophesied in northern Israel where the covenant code originated.
Yeah, according to the biblical scholars, that the covenant code originated in the north. Okay, and Amos has some very harsh criticism in his famous rhetorical section when he's, challenging all the different nations around Israel and then Israel itself. Al shloshat pishei Yisrael avar ba'al lo ashivenu, for 3 sins, for 4 I will not relent. And one of those is really selling the poor, but it's kind of the concern about.
An even better example is Nehemiah chapter 5. Almost can just preach in the streets. He doesn't have any power to do anything. Nehemiah is the one who has the power, and he insists that all Israelite slaves be freed. He goes ahead and tells the owners, if you don't free them, you're going to have all your property confiscated. I mean, he doesn't play any games. Chapter 5 of Nehemiah should be read at the same time you read any of these ringing calls in Amos or Micha or Yeshayahu to say, okay, that sounds nice. Now, was anybody in power ever prepared to enforce this? Well, yes, there was. And that's extremely inspiring, and it should be a mandatory read.
That's a good point, because indeed, and I think Nehemiah is drawing on a long tradition of, having difficulty with all of this and saying, okay, let's do something about it. Okay, go on, the harsh critique.
Even the word nichbash is used there.
The harsh critique of Judah's treatment of debt slaves found in Jeremiah, the Haftarah for Parashat Mishpatim, shows that even after the institution of the covenant code and or its reformulation in the Deuteronomic and Holiness Codes, abuse of the debt slavery law remained as a blight on the moral record of the Israelite and Judahite peoples.
Yeah, so here he takes a look at how later collections of laws in the Torah, so both in Deuteronomy and in Vayikra. Go ahead.
From the Holy Deuteronomy 15, written as part of the Judean King Josiah's reform in the late 7th century BCE, improves upon the situation of the debt slave in a number of areas. It stipulates that creditors supply a released debt slave with a portion of the wealth that the master had earned during his term of service, so that the newly released slave would not soon find himself back into debt slavery for lack of resources to start life anew.
Yeah, very, very important.
It calls for the release of female debt slaves after 6 years as well, as opposed to their permanent status in
That should be covenant code.
wives to their masters.
Yeah, so women are to be released. So there are a couple of revisions that as we compare the different laws within the Torah, we can see there are some differences. And here's Sweeney's comment on the Holiness Code, the Vayikra making changes.
The Holiness Code contains a number of modifications as well, the most stark being its refusal to use the term slave. There is no such thing as an Israelite slave in the Holiness Code's conception. Practically speaking, according to this version, debts are forgiven in the 7th year. Land sold to pay debt would be returned to its original owners after 7 weeks of years, or the 50th year, designated as the Jubilee year.
Yeah, so it goes beyond, just talking about freeing slaves, but that the debts are totally forgiven, and even the land itself goes back to original owners because, yeah, presumably, not necessarily presumably, but possibly, the land was sold because the landowners didn't have the money, and now they could get it back. So it's as if, what they didn't have could be forgiven. Go on.
Thus, the Covenant Code was the first extant step in creating legislation in Israel, but the process continued on into the other codes, and eventually into the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Shulchan Aruch, and continues even now with Mishpat Ivri.
Jewish law, Hebrew, Mishpat Ivri. And just to share with you, I didn't have a chance to copy this down, but it's along the same lines in his extended commentary on the Haftarot. I don't remember if it's in the Eitz Chaim. Fishbane writes, the divine concern to limit debt bondage, features of both the Parashah and the Haftarah, is an expression of the Bible's overall concern for human dignity. It may be observed that virtually all the Pentateuchal rules of slavery, debts, and indenture inhibit economic enrichment at the expense of other persons, and he gives a number of sources. Toward this end, the rules repeatedly invoke the restoration of ancestral property rights in the land and emphasize inviolable human rights in society. These rights are derived from divine authority, but depend upon social enactment and enforcement. Hence why, as Yehudi mentioned, Nehemiah's stance is very important. It's often nice for people to say, oh, yes, thank you, God. It's a beautiful idea, but it's got to be enforced. Jeremiah's diatribe indicates that the people's disregard for human freedom violates their ancient covenant with God, who brought them out of, literally, manumitted them from Hotzi, the house of bondage. Concern for the stranger and slave, based on national memories of bondage and alien status in Egypt, is a recurrent feature of the Pentateuchal laws. So, again, a very important ethical message that is being delivered, as the rabbis choose this haftarah to be to accompany the parasha, indicating their ongoing desire for elevating the dignity of human beings and preventing their abuse. They're very, very powerful. And I think, as we read through the laws of Mishpatim, there are a lot of, as we saw in Sarna's introduction, that that got a lot of there's social laws. So social justice is very much a concern of the covenant code, together with the ritual laws. And that's, the way it goes within Jewish law, that we have this twofold commitment to God and to other human beings. And that's both of them are integral parts of the Brit that we have with God. So
It's still confusing. I don't know what happens to the woman slave if she's released. She's supposed to go back home to her parents. I mean, obviously the master did not marry her, or the son of the master, because then she wouldn't be released. So I'm a little confused.
No, actually, the whole idea is to get her married off to even a master or the son.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of doing it.
But it doesn't always work that way.
If it doesn't work out, she goes home and basically whatever she earns still goes back to her. In other words, she cannot. It's a whole long story, Cal, but the practical matter, it deserves a separate session, and I'm sure Rabbi Pop will be more than happy to do that at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But the basic point is that this institution of selling women into slavery was done in order to see to it they didn't starve. A father would never sell his daughter into slavery unless basically the alternative was starvation. That's been the fact in human history. There's nothing particular about the Tanakh. Okay, this is, if you just take a look and see how slavery operated as an institution, if the father had any possibility of not doing that, and his daughter would stay alive and not die from hunger, it would never be done. Okay, so as a practical matter, that was simply the idea was that either the master or the son would marry her, but the Torah makes sure to put an escape hatch in case that isn't what actually happens.
Yeah, and there are other things that better reading the scholars on this in terms of and actually. One of my friends, Sean
Rabbi Poppy, I want to ask Carol, do you have JPS's Torah commentary on Exodus, the set, Carol? Because I think it would really be a good investment for you to go out and pick that set up from Amazon. Shauna has a marvelous commentary on the book of Exodus. And I'm telling you, given your interest, I think this would be a worthwhile investment. You can also get it online, but this is something you want to have as a book because if you want to read it on Shabbat.
Yeah, well, we have them in the back.
Oh, I didn't know.
Put out now a number of commentaries in the back of the shul. Both the commentary to the Sim Shalom Siddur, so people can study that, and as well a number of things that people can use during the Torah reading. I mean, the Eitz Chaim, again, is only an abbreviated version. I mean, I think it's a great job, but it's still only an abbreviated version of the 5-volume commentary on the Torah, each volume being a different sefer, and then even the Haftarot. I mean, which is a considerably long. I mean, Fishbane's commentary on the Haftarot is really, really small in many ways, but if you look at his commentary for JPS, it's a big book.
Yeah.
The fact is there. So we have got him in the back, and that's not the Haftarot, unfortunately.
Well, that's probably still sitting in my old locker, Rabbi Poppy. If you want to franchise it out, you're more than welcome.
Because it's great. So I'll wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
Vorach. Amash.
And have a great day.
Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.